Um, Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. We are excited to be back with you for another edition of Terra Firma Live. My name is James Warren. I'm here with Claire and Breland, and we just finished talking about LARPing, live action role plays. Um, but that's not our topic for today. We're not going to talk about LARPing. But I will ask one quick question before we do. Have either of you ever done that? Like
I've
participated in a
not.
LARP exercise in a park?
If laughing at them,
Participating? I have not participated in a LARP. Is that what you call it? A LARP? Is it a LARP? Is it a LARPing event? Are people LARPing? These
I think
are
it's
important
a
questions.
LARP, but the action is LARPing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Important things for us to know. If you all know, please let us know. Share the knowledge. We talk a lot about collective wisdom and
hmm
share more stories. This would be an opportunity for one. Um, all right, so we have a fascinating topic today. But before we get into it, let's just do our, round the horn. How's everybody doing? Claire, how are you doing this week? How are you doing today on this fine Friday?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to the weekend. Gonna go see an opera tomorrow, which is gonna be
Wow,
fun.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I'm getting ready for kind of all that travel that goes into it because it's up in Harrisonburg. So
okay.
it's gonna be fun.
Well, given the work on future of travel, you are an expert on these things. Breland, what about you? How are you doing this week and this day?
feeling accomplished. It was a very full week with a wide range of activities, and was earlier thinking I should probably write down the different things that I do on a week to week basis, and then look back at it because whenever I get asked what I do, like I end up talking for a longer time than I would like. But I feel like I kind of have to be tell the whole story. So, but nah, I'm very grateful to have full weeks full of fun and excitement.
Put it all in, pull it all, drop it into Chat GPT and synthesize it. What is my value proposition?
Right.
Um, well, for me, let's see, where am I coming into the week, or I should say the weekend? It has also been a very full week. A lot of progress. I think one of the things that has been where my brain has been this week is really focusing on just kind of knowing where we are, knowing where we stand, just part of this whole notion of journeys and terra firma. But it really hit home for me this week because sometimes when you're just so close to the work, you're working the work, sometimes you need to pause and on an ongoing basis assess the work, which we do a lot of. But even beyond that, like just measuring progress, sometimes you just need to pause again and be like, you know what? Let's just see where we really are, not just what the activities are, but what the impact is, what the result is. Are we making progress or not? That's what was this week was like for me. And as I paused and took stock of the things we look at every week, I was like, okay, we're making in some areas more progress than I thought we were, and in other areas we got things we got to work on. So I think that relates a little bit to our conversation this week about sustaining change. And in many ways, it sort of builds on last week's conversation about sustaining change and looking at things from the bigger picture. But what we're really looking at today, or what we're asking about today, is what does it look like to go from making commitments to making progress? In this case, we're going to look at a food service company whose commitment to sustainability led it down a path of improving nutrition, reducing weight, reducing hunger. We'll talk about some of the insights and stories that they gleaned from their customers, employees, and consumers to understand where they stood, to connect people to their purpose. We don't share the company names because we want you to focus more on the experience and less on who is it, because this is not the gossip corner. This is really about getting into what we've learned from those experiences.
Mhm.
Um, but before we get into it, a question for both of you. So when I say the words I won't do it. When I say food, I'm just kidding. When I say the words food waste or food recovery, what comes to mind for you? Claire, you first.
Yeah, I think for me, food waste is a huge thing, especially kind of living by myself and providing for myself. It's hard when I go grocery shopping because a lot of things are so bundled for larger groups, families, anything like that. So I have to be more conscious of my grocery shopping and my just food intake to make sure that I'm not producing more waste by grabbing large bundles of grapes and then only eating like half of them. So it's been something I've been learning since leaving college, to spending more time of kind of making conscious choices at the grocery store of, okay, will I eat this in the right amount of time? If not, will I be able to freeze it and save it for later? Because I really want to minimize that effect I have. So
Awesome. Breland, what's your take?
It's funny that you brought up the groceries because as my life has sped up in the past couple of weeks, my streak of cooking and eating my Hello Fresh meals has come to an end, sadly. So I've had to downsize my allocation. But to answer your question, James, it really takes me to the space of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so, if I could live in a world where people's basic needs are met, and as many people could self-actualize, whatever that means for them, that would be a world that I would live in. And so, given that we aren't in that world, being a part of a world where those who are a little bit further up, or have the privilege to be a little bit further up that pyramid, if they're figuring out ways to pull people up versus distance themselves, any opportunities or any spaces where that's occurring, excite me.
Now, I appreciate both of what you shared, and I see a lot of kind of just some themes that will relate to this customer story and this broader topic. Claire, when you talk about the experience as a shopper at the grocery store, right? We're talking about the customer experience, of course. We're also talking about packaging, promotion, price.
mhm.
Then you're navigating things at home like how much can I utilize, and what happens when I don't use it all? It goes in the garbage, but what really happens to it?
Mhm.
And then to your point, even if I weren't making the biggest impact in terms of like my accumulated waste, I know, to Breland's point, I'm wasting food. And it's one of the challenges that I've also felt over the years, just with a home and with family and kids. And, you know, my partner and I, my spouse and I, we think about it all the time, like, man, how could we reduce this waste? And sometimes it feels like the only way to reduce the waste is to like buy the perfectly portioned takeout food, which is expensive, and not always have the same nutritional value as food we cook. But we haven't figured out like that cracking that code. And I want to talk about a company that I think has reflected these individual experiences at scale and maybe started to crack some of that. As I said, it's a food service company that serves large customers, entertainment venues, companies, campuses, basically any place where a lot of people are like eating on site, right? And the food industry in general, just based on what we talked about, whether it's in the grocery side or the restaurant side or the growing side, these challenges of nutrition, of hunger, of waste, of carbon footprint, so many issues facing that industry. And I think from what we could tell when we started working with them, it seemed like they had really chosen to focus on one area in particular, which we thought was really about food waste. And it makes sense, right? Because they prepare a ton of food, and if you have ever worked in a restaurant, whether it's a small independently owned shop or part of a 2,000, 10,000 store chain, you know how much food gets wasted. Whether it's food that's not eaten and thrown out, or food that is prepared and not served and gets thrown out, or ingredients that go bad and don't get prepared and get thrown out. so much potential for waste and therefore so much potential for minimizing them, right? But how do you navigate that? How do you go on that journey? And one of the things we learned in their story was they were shifting the frame, shifting the paradigm from not only focusing on food waste, but also focusing on food recovery. And they did that by engaging everyone in their value chain, especially their customers and their diners. And so they brought us in to really collect and identify, collect, and analyze the stories of people throughout, whether they were chefs in their kitchens or business managers in the field or actual diners in places that they served. They wanted to hear the stories of how people were navigating this issue of minimizing food waste through more food recovery. And we heard stories of what I would say broadly were innovation and compassion together. They were innovating their way. I mean, I don't even know how to say it. It's almost like they were innovating their way through compassion. They were finding ways to get to, as Breland pointed out, like, what's the core human need we're trying to solve here? We're trying to make sure people can eat. And yes, some of these people, they pay for their food, but right next to the places that they may be paying for their food, there are people starving or at least going hungry. And so, we learned from the stories that we collected so many incredible examples of everything from like rescuing prepackaged food that before their initiative would get thrown out. They had some really cool things where they would give diners the opportunity. People do a lot of that roundup nowadays. We can round up your change. They would round up the change to donate to food pantries or food insecure communities. They would even involve some of their diners in kind of branded food drive initiatives. And they were taking a very holistic approach, which we were able to learn by collecting such a wide range of stories from all over the country, all of their business units, different levels in the organization, and different parts, again, in that ecosystem. And we worked with them to help them turn those stories actually into a social campaign. And so in this case, we were gleaning insights both from the original stories and how a much larger audience was engaging this issue through this content. The insights were compelling. I mean, thematically and from a marketing perspective, they were able to really kind of identify what was driving sort of the organization's passion for this issue. It really was mission driven. They were able to kind of see and assess how some organizations were doing with it and how others needed some additional support. They also saw a tremendous response in social when they activated this content. They raised the visibility of the initiative. It wasn't about getting views and clicks and likes. It was really about how do we get more people to buy into this journey, to commit to this cause. And they did that both inside and outside their organization. And I think, companies get a lot of pushback on their social footprint, their social responsibility, how they're navigating their issues, and rightfully so. But what struck me about this work was the journey that we could see that they were on, from intention all the way through to really making progress and ultimately a sustained change. I think there were several things that we could see present in this company's story that I'd love your perspectives on in a moment. One, they had CEO level support. And I think that's critical for any kind of massive initiative. They made a commitment and they stated their commitment. They had goals for the level of food reduction, food waste reduction within 3 years when we started working with them. They also had assigned staff and rolled out their engagement initiative internally. It wasn't just internal communications, it was a full program. And they made progress, as we learned from all these stories, which were really the way to tell their story of progress. They could identify the business units that needed more help. They could identify the business units that were creating some of those innovations. And ultimately, they really started to make a sustained change and impact. I think, as I mentioned, they implemented new technology that could, report and quantify the amount of food waste and reduction in waste. They were able to galvanize people throughout, not just in the industry, but in communities, and really ramp up the advocacy behind this issue. And none of this happened overnight. They have been on a journey that at that point was arguably, or now I should say, it's been like a decade long. And their goals stretch into the next decade. I mean, they're not doing this in a short term focused way. And, I think so many companies lack the ability to sustain their commitment over a longer period of time. I think, maybe that comes down to what they see as the core issue for them and whether or not they've got a deep enough commitment to it. But, Breland, you and I worked on this project together, and even now I know how important, as you already alluded to, this issue of food security, food justice, how important it is to you. What do you think it takes to make meaningful progress in this space? What do you see either in this organization or others that stands out to you as either best practices or lessons to be learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really serves as a blueprint around collective impact, starting with, as you mentioned, the top down approach, but probably more importantly, the different sectors that they engaged and the strategic approach that they leverage in a similar way, where if they were looking to maximize profits, they're covering all the bases and just going beyond checking the box. And I think, they're uniquely positioned in the food space to solve food problems. And so I think as others are thinking about, what problems can you solve, it really starts with the space you're in, and then figure out kind of what makes sense given your partnerships and footprint where you can help. And so I imagine when they started, it was a single program or perhaps one. And I'm sure since then it's probably grown even beyond where that started. And so I think just really that holistic strategic approach that had that ripple effect where you're really driving an impact that's being measured and optimized. And so on the personal side, I think what I've been inspired by, if we go back, it's hard to believe it was 3 years ago, but I guess 3+ years ago, where a reckoning was happening and people, to various degrees of organization were looking for what they could do. After I got my, cries out and screams out and marches out, really started to think about kind of where could I make an impact, and really started with, what are the spaces that I occupy. And so I've been very blessed to build a network, but also going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, people might be disagreeing about a whole lot of things, but I imagine we could get people to agree on people should be fed when we're all locked in our houses. Certain jobs have been impacted and people are experiencing losses. And so from that, became aware of the good brother Duran Chavis's work. And at that point, I was not probably as close or familiar to his whole journey. But at the time, he was doing urban garden box distribution. So I had access to a big truck and a couple others. And so started with, maybe calling a buddy and saying, hey, like, been locked in for a while, trying to do some good, and figured out, ended up buying a drill. I was like, I could probably benefit from being a little bit handier. And then every once, probably made, I can't even remember the number, but like spent at least a handful of days going all around the greater Richmond area, get to connect with people, and then literally build a box in their backyard, soil it, and keeping it moving. And, the fact that I could say, hey, I, contributed to, I think they ended up dropping over 300 boxes, and to be able to play a part in that was cool. And so becoming more familiar with that work, got to see kind of his different spaces that he had throughout the community, and at that point, he was starting to build the Sankofa orchard, which is not too far from where I'm currently sitting in Southside. And so at that point, it was largely a vision, but basically a space that has been underutilized due to decades of neglect. He was able to get ownership, or I should say,
Stewardship.
stewardship in terms of managing the space, and took kind of a blueprint where 80 fruit trees and pollinators and all of that. And I think I was helping him out there kind of put in some of the initial trees. But today, having helped bring in a couple of organizations that I volunteer with to lend a helping hand. It's, there's street art, all with Black radical street art throughout. There's pollinators blooming. There's trees everywhere. I think he now has like a distribution food system, so almost like a local Hello Fresh, and but also it's been cool to see people that I know or probably don't know really embrace the work. And so, I mean, I think from an impact standpoint, it's been really cool to work with that. And so I even think, okay, how do we connect the Durans with the corporations with complementary skill sets just to continue to amplify how we can collectively make an impact.
You just hit on one key theme, which is really a big part of why we do what we do at Share More Stories, which is really going from ultimately from insights to impact. The goal of the work we do is not only to learn from these stories and experiences, it's to ultimately make these experiences better. And this notion of really coming back to a community centric approach to food security, food justice, food equity in many respects is a beautiful thing. I want to shift it to Claire for a minute, because when you think, Claire, about the work we do with our customers, often they're trying to address these big issues and make this kind of meaningful change that Breland just talked about, even if they're doing it in whether it's hyper local or national or even global. And you're also pretty engaged in the community yourself. What do you see as examples when you are about your life and this work? What do you see as examples of getting this process right?
Yeah, I mean, I think successfully addressing these big issues just involves actively listening to your customers, understanding what their pain points are, their concerns, um, and then bringing solutions that meet the needs for them and click for them, and then keeping them in the loop with just clear and honest communication. And tying into what Breland said, I think a commitment to community engagement should go beyond just like simple transactions. It's important to embrace initiatives that contribute meaningfully to people's welfare. And by doing this, companies can just cultivate that larger impact, helping move their organizations towards meaningful change.
No, I love that. And I heard the cultivate in there. I'm picking up what you're putting down. But no, I think it's a beautiful theme we're sort of pulling out here in real time, which is this idea that, these things aren't separate, in the companies and in the relationships that we as consumers and employees and residents and stakeholders have and want to have with companies. Community engagement and brand impact and core issue management and reputation, like, they're all the same. Yes, these companies want to see these as different departments. This will be managed in our corporate social responsibility group, and this is external affairs, and this is product, and this is environmental, studies or what have you. It's all interconnected, because at the end of the day, our experiences are not fragmented. Our experiences are holistic. We show up every day, everywhere we're moving. We're moving as a consumer of something, as a provider of something, as a receiver and emitter of other things. Um, we are working, we are contributing, we're living. And I think, when it comes back to things this important to like life and living, like food, it is both on one hand a little, as you kind of alluded, Brian, a little sad and distressing that we have to still be figuring this out at a local, national, and global level. And on the other hand, it's encouraging to know that there are individuals, whether they're the Durans of the world or big companies like this, that are making a difference, because the common thread in all that is it's humans making human experiences better. Um, and I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's a huge area of opportunity for so many companies. And one of the things I was going to come back to, we got a couple minutes, is this notion that the way to make change is to focus on your core issue. And I guess my question for either one of you in a minute or so: how do you figure out your core issue? What's the most important thing? And there's never one, but what is one of the most important things, or what is one of the ways you can hone in on what's most important for your business to be thinking about when it comes to impact?
I think, like as I touched on, it really starts by looking at what your assets are and maybe what your impacts are today, and then seeing if there's a nexus opportunity there. But I also think it's an iterative process where you got to start with we're committing to do good.
Yes.
You also have to start with what you know and what you don't know, and then start to find the people that do know, and don't be restrictive in empowering them to solve
Mm.
that problem. So I
And
think,
oftentimes those people are in the impacted community.
Mhm.
yeah,
Most often, those people are in the impacted community, or they are very, very closely adjacent to it in terms of people who know the most how to solve the problem. Claire, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just agreeing with Braylon on that point. I mean, I think the biggest point is knowing where you are, knowing your starting point, and trying to figure out where you want to go, and then it kind of just falls in line after that.
And that's what we do, right? That's a big part of what the journey is at Share More Stories, and specifically with CCAP. It's helping you figure out what you do know and really what you don't. It's helping you figure out, who is that key constituent, the customer, the employee, the consumer, the resident, um, the stakeholder, who's being impacted by what you do, either positively or negatively, and what can you understand about their experiences? What do you need to know? Some of that's going to be really, really obvious, like we got to solve this immediate problem, like hunger. Some of it is beyond the obvious. It's like, well, how? Identifying the what's might be not easy, but relatively speaking, easier. But identifying the why and the how and the so what, that's not always easy, especially when you're talking about people. And that's one of the things that I love about the work we do, is we help people understand what people really need, what they value, what they care about, and what they're experiencing with your product or your brand or your community. So if you want to be part of that kind of a journey with us, and you want to learn more about how we're helping companies in a variety of industries tackle these enormous, mega human problems, as well as things like how to create better messaging and everything in between, because it really is all of the above, go to sharemorestories.com, click on CCAP on the left side of the page, and you'll be able to get an overview of the product, or go to CCAP and register as an individual user and get a feel for how participants experience it, or just message us on whatever platform you're watching this on now. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to talk about how we can help you make progress. That's all we got for today. So we wish all of you out there a happy Friday and a great weekend. And Claire and Breland, I hope you both have a wonderful weekend. Claire, enjoy the opera. Breland, enjoy a little decompression before you pick up the basketball, or watch the ball. And I am going to land the plane this Friday afternoon, and then get ready to support my spouse in her half marathon tomorrow. So that's what we got. Thank you all for tuning in to Terra from Alive, and have a great weekend. Thanks.